Let me just wait until it's on. So how's everybody? Thank you for still staying here and enjoying our meeting, our unusual offering. Hold on. All right, now we can start. We can start with the recording. Yes. So now we come to our last segment, which is the keynote, which is the center stage. Center stage in trainers and coaches is the special segment to promote for the member to practice preparing for their sometimes signature training or event or keynote, or just taking on a bigger challenge with a longer presentation. So Jane is going to do that. So we take turns. So now it's Jane's turn. And so this is for the highlight of our meeting. The keynote is a broader perspective through listening. Understand how unbiased listening uncovers truth for you and the other party by Toastmaster Jane Moore. In this keynote address, Jane Moore will illuminate the profound effects of unbiased listening. This insightful presentation will teach us how active, empathetic listening can reveal deeper truths, build trust, and lead to more meaningful interactions. As trainers and coaches, mastering this skill is a must, and it is invaluable for our personal and professional development. So without further ado, let's welcome Toastmaster Jane Moore, a broader perspective through listening, Jane Moore.
Am I audible? Am I audible? Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
you're audible.
Okay. All right. So, yes, I'm a journalist for 14 years, and I covered different types of stories, politics, sports, crime cases, court cases, anything happening in the community. But the problem with the people is that they thought that what we do as journalists is just writing. We just write. That's actually the second part of the job. The first part of the job, and I think the most important part of the job, is actually interviewing people. But when it comes to interview, it is not about just throwing questions at the other person. It is not like, you go to a job interview and they just throw questions at you. No, this is not what we do. We don't do that. Unless you are a politician, then we can just throw whatever questions we want to ask you, because you're accountable to, and you're answerable to the people. But most of the time, that is not what we do. But sadly, that is what most people would think that we do. So when we want to interview somebody, and some people would get very nervous, and they would ask, what are you going to ask? What are you going to ask? And normally what we want to do is we want to make sure that they're calm and they understand why we are doing this interview. And the reason why, myself and the other person sit down together and do this interview is because the other person is interesting. I understand that you're interesting. But the problem, I think the central problem with people, a lot of people, especially interesting people, they don't know that they're interesting or why they're interesting. And my job is not to tell you or try to convince you that you are an interesting person. my job is to be patient enough to find that ideas, and then we will know why you're interesting. And of course, I'm not, I don't consider myself as a great interviewer. I don't consider myself as someone who asks very difficult questions, but of course, some people would disagree with that. There are some interviewers would go and ask some hardcore criminals and try to extract truth from them. I'm not that kind of interviewer. I'm nowhere near that kind of interviewer. But of course, there are some interviewers that are really admired. And they could throw follow-up questions after follow-up questions, and that really amazed me, because for an interview to be successful is the follow-up questions. But the secret of follow-up questions is not just throwing questions at the interviewee. The secret is actually in the listening. It is only when you truly listen to the other person, then you know what are the questions you are going to ask. Listening is a trust building exercise. And it is only when you trust me that we can have this conversation. And when we can have this meaningful conversation, I know where to look. I know what kind of questions I want to ask so that I can push them to the right direction. And every time I do that, it actually gave me a different perspective. And I want to give you an example of one of the interviews I did last year. I interviewed a woman for the International Women's Day write-up. And that was the assignment given to me. And she is the materials and corrosion engineer. And that role was perceived as a role dominated by men. So initially, I thought, okay, this woman is going to show some women's power. It's a kind of, I can do whatever men do. Well, at least there was the assignment given to me, and that was the direction that I went to when I went for that interview, when I did that interview. And in the middle of that interview, I asked the questions. I forgot the exact question, but her response was this. She said about, male-dominated role. She said, there's no such thing as male-dominated role or even female-dominated role, no matter how tough the job is. They are just roles, they are just work. And everybody who have the right attitude is capable of taking that role. And that was not the kind of direction that I was into, because it's International Women's Day. I need to tell the people about women, about what women can do. And so at that point, I felt as if she was telling me that I have to let go of that mindset. I mean, it's 21st century. And of course, I could go like, wait a minute. That is not the direction I want to go. That is just a common thing. Everybody just doing their job. That's it. And I don't want that kind of direction. I want to talk about women's power. Can you do something? Can you tell me something? Show to the world, or maybe men, that women can do it too. I could go with that bias. I could go with that. Or I could listen without any judgment and just be curious about it and just respect her point of view. instead of pushing her to go to the direction that I want to go. So in the end, in my article, I did not mention anything about she was showing women's power. There was nothing about it. The article was just about you can be the one to decide whether you can do it or you cannot do it. And that's it. The decision is yours. Whether you're man or woman, and if you want to do something, it's all happening in your head and depends on your attitude. That was the direction for my article. And surprisingly, that article actually garnered a lot of readers. And also because of that article, she was invited to give a motivational talk in Kuching. I know because someone in Kuching, I think from a science park, I don't know, they contacted me to ask for her phone number. So people are taking her perspective. If I were to go with my own direction, then she will not be given this kind of opportunity. So I was able to bring out the best in her because I started listening without any bias. And I just respect her perspective. So in this session, I'm not going to talk about the interview because not every one of you doing interviews. But I'm going to share an important lesson I learned from the interview process that we can apply in our lives, especially when you're taking up a leadership position or trainers or coaches. And so one of the things that we must understand is that we have to learn to listen without any bias. And the first thing we need to understand is that listening is a trust building exercise. Just think about it. It's really weird to have two strangers meeting for the first time. We probably talk on the phone, but we met for the first time and you're going to share something, probably something very personal to you, to me. You're going to share that stories to me, and that story is going to go public. And that itself is a trust given to me. So my job is to keep that trust. And I know that the more trust I get, the juicier the story. So I need that trust. So how do I gain that trust? I'm just going to share with you two things that I learned that I think that you can practice and you can apply in your daily lives. The first thing is I learned to listen without judgment. Now, I know that some people might not agree with me, but human beings are very judgmental creatures. We have our own biases. And the reason why we have our own biases is because our views on the world. And if we only keep to our own biases and not open to other perspective, the moment we heard something that we don't want or don't like to hear, the first instinct is to shut our ears and stop listening. Because you're protecting your own world, you're protecting your own perspective. That is our own biases. So when you do that, that is when communication stops. Because you are telling me something that I don't want to hear. But here's the thing. Listening without any judgment doesn't mean that you have to agree with the other person. It just means that I'm here and I'm truly listening because I want to know. And just learn to appreciate what you're saying. And in the interview, yes, I do have a list of questions. And I viewed interview, I regard interview as a dialogue. So when you have a dialogue, it is important to have your ears open. Only then you can have a conversation. So which means you have to go with an empty bucket. If you disagree with the other person, you have to put all the judgment aside. Because remember, this is another thing that I learned. If you heard the most ridiculous perspective from the other person you're talking with or talking to, the other person gave you the most ridiculous ideas ever. And that person really truly believe in that idea. Remember, there are thousands, if not millions, of people who have the same views as that person. And you listen to that view firsthand. So you understand the world better. And in turn, when you understand the world better, the other person feel heard, and people will know when you're listening. And when they feel heard, they will keep on sharing. And this is another thing that I learned, the second thing. When people keep sharing, even if you don't like it, don't be too quick to interrupt. When I mentioned don't be too quick to interrupt, there are two things that you can't do. Well, at least that I don't do. First is that if the other person gets into my nerves with a ridiculous perspective, let them finish. Let them share. Don't interrupt. And the second thing is, you don't interrupt the thought process. The reason why you need to let them finish so that they can, share whatever they want to share, they feel heard. For yourself, you have to know that this is a perspective. And now you have to know, you have to try to understand the kind of perspective. And in the interview process, these are the things that I need to do. I need to do two things. I need to listen to the other person. When I heard something that sparked something, I have to think. And normally I have a book, of course. I write it down. So make sure that I don't forget. And then I'll go back to these thoughts and I'll ask that. So I don't interrupt. But of course, sometimes I do interview session with other fellow journalists. And of course, there are some journalists who just love to interrupt before the interviewers could even finish what they're trying to say. And that is annoying. Because if you do that, you don't give the space or the opportunity to the other person to express what they are trying to express. You don't give them the space to tell you the full information. And as a result, the information is just hanging there. And that happens sometimes. Sometimes, of course, I'm not a perfect person. Sometimes I do shut my ears when I listen to whatever information that doesn't make any sense. I just close it. And then when I go back and I started writing, and I thought that perspective, that ideas popped out. And then I thought, that's a good idea. But I couldn't write it because the information was just hanging there. I didn't let it finish. So when you are in a conversation, don't interrupt. It's not just to show a respect for the other person, but you have to take that. You must go with your own thought process also. Because when you interrupt the flow of information, that listening process can lead to distortion of facts, and you don't want that. And when we don't have a complete information, we make assumptions. And that assumption could lead to misunderstandings. And you have to remember, all of us have our biases. So we already have our biases. And then you have incomplete information about something. Then our behavior will be affected because of our perceived truth, what we think we know. Now, I'll give you a very simple example. For example, like the Earth is in fact round, right? Well, not really round, but just say that the Earth is in fact round. Now, because some people have incomplete information and they thought the Earth is flat, because if the Earth is not flat, we will fall. But the fact is the Earth is round, and the reason we're not falling is because of the gravity. So you need a complete information. So these are the two things that I learned. Do not interrupt, and you have to listen without any judgment. You have to empty your bucket. And of course, what kind of a benefit that you will gain? Yes, you will have a better understanding of the world. But I think the most important thing when you practice this kind of listening, it not only help you to sharpen your listening skills, but it helps you to build empathy. Empathy, I know that some people would disagree with me, but because when it comes to the word empathy is not just a feeling. And I know that some people would just confine empathy with feelings. Empathy is not putting myself into your shoes. You can disagree with me. It's fine, right? It's not putting myself into your shoes. It's not me having the same feeling as yours or share the same feeling. No, empathy is more than that. Empathy is becoming completely aware of the other person's perspective. It's completely aware of the other side's perspective, their point of view, their take on things, how they see it, and what they feel. In other words, it is an understanding of their worldview. And here's the thing, you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to have the same feeling as the other person. You don't have to put yourself in those shoes. You just need to understand their perspective, their point of view, their take on things. And you need to respect that. So if you're a coach or a trainer or an entrepreneur, try to get a business deal, for example. And if you understand what drives a customer, what drives the clients, what they think, you understand the point of view, chances are you can get a better deal because you know what they want. You get into their head. You can get a better deal if you know how to negotiate, of course. And I cannot talk about negotiations because I know nothing about negotiations. So anyway, listening is an important skill, not just because we want the other person to feel heard, but because all of us have our biases. And somehow that biases distorted the way we see things or the other person. If we only stick to our own biases, if we only stick to our own perspective and our own worldview, we can never understand that there are other perspectives, good or bad. Everyone, especially those in the leadership position, needs to have a broader perspective in order to lead well and to improve our relationship with other person. And listening is important. so that we can learn a much broader perspective, to understand people and the world better. And most importantly, we know that we are capable of taking other people's perspective and to have better understanding of ourselves and the world. Over to you.
Wow, Jane. Thank you. Everyone, let's give Jane a very big hand of applause. And if you want to put your comments, your praises, please share in the chat. It was something to reflect on very deeply, and listening is one of my favorite subjects. And it's thank you, Jane, for sharing that and for imploring and inspiring us to listen better. Yes. Okay. Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, what an incredible journey we've had today. We've had shared stories, pushed limits, and inspired each other to truly go beyond boundaries. I think the listening keynote that we just heard from Jane is one of those. In fact, all of the 3 segments today were pushing boundaries, were helping us open and stretch our mind for something that have never been before. So I hope you leave here feeling emboldened to break new ground in your training and coaching. As we wrap up, I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for bringing your energy and courage to the table. Remember, the growth we talked about isn't limited to the confines of this meeting. It's out there in every conversation, every session you lead, every challenge you face. And with that, my time as your MC and Toastmasters of the meeting is coming to a close. It's been an absolute pleasure guiding us through today's adventure. Now I'll pass the baton back to our esteemed president to send us off into the world where boundaries are waiting to be crossed. Thank you, everyone. Let's keep pushing beyond. President Shelina, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I invite you to join me to give our Toastmaster of the evening, DTM Miranda Rumi, a thunderous round of applause. Thank you so much, Miranda. As a Toastmaster meeting or MC, it is definitely not easy to try to execute the role or commission the role and listen to the speakers. Well, you did that fantastically. I really appreciate your enthusiasm, commitment in taking that role. And always so much to learn from you.